Okay, gang. I got the head thumbs up from Dr. Paula in the back to go. Thank you all for coming on a Thursday afternoon. I know this is the sleepy time of the day, so just feel free to kick back and take a nap while you're at it. My name's Erin. I'm a research scientist in the Anthropology department, and this is a double pop-up. The first one is going to be about 20 minutes long, and I'm going to talk about skulls. I'm going to give you like a super fast overview of skulls. I mean, really fast. I'm going to go chipmunk on speed on y'all. And then I want to talk about some case studies and some implications for what those skulls are meaning in my own research. And then I'm going to have a break so that you can flee or run, or we'll do Q&A. Then you can flee, and if you want to stick around, at 2:30, I'm going to make an announcement about something that the Anthropology department, found last month, and I'm excited to tell you about it. So, and then I was doing a poison tour this morning, and I'm teaching archaeology of city parks, so my head is all awash, so I'm probably going to just mess all of this up. So just take a nap. It's really the best thing to do. I would start out by saying that the first presentation will have images of human remains. They're all from published teaching collections. None are indigenous, but they are a little bit graphic, so if that's not your cup of tea, sorry. Look down, look away, but we all have one, so we're just going to talk about them, okay? Anything to start with? Other than me standing in front of the presentation like a rookie. I'm going to stand over here. Okay. So, all right, here we go. Head case to the archaeology of skulls. Really briefly, your skull is awesome, and it comes in all different parts. So when you come out of your mother's womb, you have a number of different sort of elements to you, and all of these are usable and diagnostic and have information sort of embedded in them. And if you blow it apart, that's the sphenoid, my favorite bone in the body because I missed it on every anatomy test I ever took. It looks like a butterfly. But all of these are useful and worthwhile, and why babies are tiny little heads is because their brains grow so fast that the skulls can't keep up with them. Sex is the biological bits you're born with, and you can sex yourselves here in a minute. The head is the second, well, DNA is of course the first, but before we had DNA, you would tell sex usually from the pelvic girdle and from the crania. And the way you would do that is you can just feel whether you have brow ridges. Males have a tendency, not always, it just depends on the population and the individual, but a tendency to have about 30% more muscles than female. So that results in supraorbital brow ridges. Males also, because of the larger musculature, have what's known as an occipital bun or an occipital attachment. So if you feel the back of your head, that little bit is, no one's feeling the back of your head. This is interactive, y'all. Feel the back of your flipper. There you go. Now, and then you can sort of determine whether you can tell. And then your external auditory meatus, the thing right behind your ear, if it's super protruding, you'd have a tendency to possibly be male. If not, you have a tendency to possibly be female in a mastoid process. So this is just a different way of sort of looking at it. They back in the day, they used to call these hyper males, hyper females, and things like that. Really, at the end of the day now, DNA is really the best way to go. But if you can't afford that, this is a poor man's way of determining sex. But what's cool about archaeological collections is people are going back and figuring out that we've done this wrong. Oftentimes associating robust women with like swords and buried with cool things like that with being male, which is not true. Age, this is something that I particularly am loving these days. There's lots of things. You got lots of teeth, and teeth are awesome. So yes, take a look at this guy, deciduous baby teeth. You've got 32 permanent adult teeth. They all come in different shapes and sizes, and they all come in sort of on a regular basis. So there's this great map that I need to redraft, but it basically shows what you're born with. You have little baby teeth that are just subcutaneous when you're born, and then they begin to erupt at particular times. So it's really, really, really to age people who are younger than 18 because their teeth are perfect tells of what their age would have been. So looking at that, and now looking at this, how old is this person? All I want for Christmas is my tooth. 6, about age 6. So those teeth right there are about to come in and knock those out. I can't believe I just sang to you. This is clearly how nervous I am. Okay, so, and then also when your sutures kind of seal up is another way of telling the age of an individual. So you young people who are probably under the age of 20 or 25, your sutures are still in the final phases of sealing up. And we can hit you in the head more often than the older people because your brain actually has more movement to kind of squish around and expand, and it's why young people deal better with head injuries than older people. Older people, say for me, are all sealed up, and consequently that brain has no place to go. But it's also, for archaeological, it's a good way to sort of tell how old this person is. So how old is this person on the right? You sound like undergraduates. Adults, yeah. Health, pathology, and trauma. This is where it gets a little weird. Hypoplasias, teeth are sort of barometers of health. When you don't have enough, you have nutritional stress, and not just a missed meal, but a month of missed meals, your body shuts down. Basically, you stop growing, you stop, and your body's just trying to keep your internal organs and your brain going. And because of that, your bones stop growing and your teeth stop growing, and you have what's called hypoplasia. And these are cessations of growth in humans, and they're really unfortunate. This is what happens when babies don't get sort of enough particular kinds of proteins and other sorts of foods. It's called cribia orbitalia. Penicillin is your friend and mine. Don't get syphilis. There's some other sorts of... Was that a newsflash to you all? Cancer is, there's often sort of evidence of significant amounts of prehistoric cancer, hyperporosis. Oops, I got a little overzealous. Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd, all the things. And then there's, I guess no one wants to see a gunshot. So there's also pre-mortem, perimortem, and post-mortem trauma. So you can tell if a person has suffered an injury before their death and it kind of healed at the time of their death, or an archaeologist put a pickaxe through your head, which happened to Richard III, because they didn't have an archaeologist dig him. They had a biological anthropologist. They should never be digging. Anyway, so this person is pre-mortem. So you see this is sharp force trauma, and you can see that this injury is partially healed. So they took some sort of really unfortunate blow to the head, but survived it and lived to tell the tale. Okay, that was terrifying. We are now being haunted. No, really, it's been a whole week of poltergeist for me, so this is how it rolls. This person actually survived for a period of time as well. They took that, you can see the healing in the back there. Those are all, sort of early bone growth that they began to sort of recover briefly from that injury. Burning happens, pre-peri and post-mortem infection, so this person had lost all the... Really, agriculture was really the worst mistake humans ever made. Once we did that, our teeth started looking like this. They were ground down by grit and sand that was in sort of, the processing tools that we had. They got an infection in the top of their mouth that poured through the bone, and that would have killed them in the end. So a tooth infection could kill you back in the day. So thank a dentist, and thank someone with penicillin. Are we okay with that? Okay, yes, okay. Just checking. Perimortem, so this is Richard III, the king of England, and he was stabbed in the Battle of Bosworth Fields, and he has a number of pretty unfortunate injuries all around him. Here's another blade wound. There were more than one of them was fatal, so he sort of had a rough go of it. Modification, we have always been doing surgery on skulls. Up to 30,000 years ago, skulls have been sort of... What happened to that photo? Sorry, there's holes there. I don't know sorry about the quality. But this is early surgery, and what's cool is recently they've been finding that people are practicing on horses to do surgery so that they can come back, and here are some trepanations. These are things that are used. We don't know what they were trepanning for, but possibly for seizures, for cancers, for headaches. And there are people who survive it, and people who survive it for a little while, and people who don't make it through. And you can tell based on the healing what all that is. And then there's modification and cradleboard. And this is when a baby's head is modifiable and thin and porous and unfused, you can modify their heads. And this is why we get bad Indiana Jones movies. Evolution is a thing too, so in case you ever want to know sort of how evolution is, skulls are a really good tell of looking at cranial size and how much brain capacity, and thinking archaeologists who are paleoanthropologists sort of think into sort of these histories and associate behaviors with them. This is all about burial and sort of, maybe Homo naledi was maybe the first ancestor who might have buried, and then it's controversial whether the Neanderthals did. But always good dates to know in case George is at a staff meeting and you need to know these times and places of things. And then origins. I don't have a photo for this, but like, for instance, if you came up and pulled my teeth out, you would find that I am what I eat, which is cereal and water from Central Texas. So that's because I grew up on water and foodstuffs that were from the Edwards Aquifer, and because of that, you are what you eat. So if I did the same to any of you all, I would be able to pin down approximately where you spent a majority of your childhood based upon the mineral contents in your teeth. And it's a really cool way to know that, like, even if you didn't know one thing about me, you knew I grew up in Austin and saw the light and came to Colorado and died at a very old age here. So origin is pretty cool. And now I just want to jump into head cases with my last 20 minutes. And these are some stories. I don't know why. I'm not a physical anthropologist. I'm not a biological anthropologist. But heads have followed me around my whole life. So when I was working in Turkey, I just got in this excavation unit, which is this is Çatalhöyük. I don't know if you ever heard of it. If you haven't, please look it up. It's like I spent my whole life in T-ball, and like this is Yankee Stadium of amazingness. You had to speak about 8 different languages to talk to people because there was Italian, Turkish, English, German, and Polish spoken on this site, which was great. But in this one unit, there were a number of folks who were deceased, and they were buried underneath the floors. This is about 9,000 BC, so about, a significantly long time ago. People are buried under the floors, and they're often buried without their heads. Not only without their heads, but sometimes buried with other people's heads plastered over, and other people who aren't related to them, and then covered over with an extraordinary plaster. So there's like these stories of deep time. We don't know the significance of it. All the archaeology of the art in the rooms depicts humans without their heads being eaten by giant birds or auroch skulls. So there's a whole fascination with this that Ian Hodder and his team are still trying to figure out. But I found the only head. This was so exciting because I was an important unit. I was in graduate school. I had no life. It was, well, actually, that's the same now, so it doesn't matter. But this is a young person with no head. There's another adult head that's over here. This person is about 12 years old. We don't know the sex because they're too young. There's an adult human foot behind them and another adult human foot over there. And this is the only burial like this that's ever been found at Çatalhöyük, which I'm excited about. So I'm published in a weird, obscure magazine in Turkey because of this. But it sort of started my fascination with heads, and sort of I teach the archaeology of death, so I'm interested in sort of like vampirism stories from Europe. These are 2 people who were accused of vampirism. Probably they were just foreigners. Then I love sort of in the Upper Paleolithic, back when humans were still beginning to sort of demonstrate awareness and early levels of art. Art only showed up about 50,000 years ago. If you're going really far back to Blombos Cave, maybe 80,000 years ago. But there are the depictions of this human figure, and some people argue this is the same figure, 2 in wood and 1 in stone. And if you notice, these faces are asymmetrical. And there's a thinking that, you can't see on this one, sorry, I didn't find a good photo, but this person, they kind of have a downward turned face. Their eyes aren't sort of in the normal state. This is a little cruder, but this has a definite upturned side of the mouth and a downturned side of the mouth, and a lower eye and an upper eye. And what was cool is in the center of where these 3 heads were found, about between 30 and 120 miles away, was this individual who was an ochre stain, which if you were really important if you got covered in ochre 26,000 years ago. It was not a thing to be trifled with. It was an older woman, shocking, under 2 mammoth shoulder blades, I hear a good gift for the burials, holding a fox, and who had suffered a stroke, and very likely had sort of bilateral paralysis, and her head was depicted and then distributed in ways that we don't know the significance of, but is significant. And it's kind of a miracle that all 3 of those things came together. So that was probably a really, really important woman in the Upper Paleolithic when the earth was young and the ice was packed, and she lived a hard life and survived well into her adulthood, well after her stroke sort of, not crippled, what's the right word? I don't know the right word. Debilitated her. There we go. Prosopography is something that I got into in graduate school because, again, I was given another head, and it was this head, and it's R192. And I spent a semester with this individual, and they look quite extraordinary and interesting and normal. They're partially mummified, but they're from ancient Nubia, which is modern-day Sudan. This is about from the 6th or 7th century AD. And basically, in graduate school, they give you a couple of books and a skeleton, and they say, write a paper, and we'll see you in 3.5 months. And that's what I did. So I studied this individual, and I did a Zoom. I'm sorry, I didn't know I did a Zoom. No, Erin. Oh, humiliations. I'm so sorry. And I didn't have any ways of, there was no budget. I was in graduate school, so I didn't have any ways of doing genetic abnormalities. So I just sort of did thick description. And then I went to the medical school, and I checked out books on diseases of children, because if you look at this individual's teeth, you'll know that they were probably around 18 years old. Their molars had come in, but their wisdom teeth hadn't. So 17 or 18 years old. I sort of started looking at genetic abnormalities, and then I started looking at environmental abnormalities, all just from the skull. And they had all kinds of troubles. They had extra teeth. Yes, you're not supposed to have that many. There's one sort of crammed in there. Only 0.01% of the population in the world has that. And that's indicative of sort of some genetic sort of issues. they're only 17 and they've already lost some of their back teeth and they were reabsorbed, so this person wouldn't have been able to sort of chew very well, but that's really evidence of really poor health. They had hypoplasias, so remember what hypoplasias were, cessation of growth after significant periods of nutritional deficits, and basically that indicates they had 6 of them. That means 6 times between the age of birth and the time they died around 17 or 18 years old, they were starving nearly to death. That's my photography was questionable in the early 2000s. They also had a depressed skull fracture. Someone had hit them really hard on the head, and it was healing ever so slightly. There it is. They had scaphocephaly. Do you see the deformation actually of the skull? And what happens is those sutures sealed up too soon, and this individual's brain was not allowed to develop. So there's a sagittal suture fully fused and obliterated, but that coronal suture is healthy. So that means it's probably genetic and not environmental that this would have happened. And this person was really small. And if you go sort of through the life history, what you'll know, what I learned was this was a proportional dwarf, a person who suffered from proportional dwarfism. It's different from achondroplastic dwarfism, but they were quite small. They lived a really hard life. In utero, they would have had one of 4 autosomal sort of recessive genetic disorders that they would have suffered from. They would have been probably less than 5 pounds at birth. Their parents wouldn't have noticed that they were some sort of issue until they were about 2 or 3 years old. By the time and this is a male, other boys their age would have tripled in size, and this individual never did. If he was able to work, he would have worked probably on a farm. He would have worn these sort of burlappy and sort of cotton clothes. He lived right on the Nile in a little island on the Nile called Kulabnarti. But he had a really hard life. He would have had these sort of big bulging eyes. He would have had chronic tinnitus. He was clearly beaten on a regular basis. He was clearly suffered from his proportional dwarfism would have been exacerbated by his deficits in his nutritional elements. Clearly, when he got food, which would have been sorghum and peanuts and maybe occasionally a little bit of meat, he would have had to chew it on the right side of his mouth because he'd be unable to masticate on the left. And then finally, sort of when he succumbed to his injuries, with which he had infections on his clavicle, he had that really unfortunate head injury that would have been still infected by the time of his death. When he sort of succumbed to his injuries, they buried him on the outside of the cemetery in a shallow grave with nothing else associated with him. And all of that's prosopography, that's biography in the aggregate from one sort of thing, from a person who's never had one thing written about him. We're still able to tell his story just through the analysis of the crania and a semester of no life. And I just want to end with my last 10 minutes on, maybe 5 minutes, on the crania of Aztec. This is sort of, I pivoted away from skulls, I thought, to do the political and social order of ancient Pueblo people in the U.S. Southwest, in Colorado and New Mexico, particularly. This is what I wrote my dissertation on. And I got interested in Pueblo political authority and violence, which is, for a variety of reasons, a sticky topic to talk about, because ancestral Pueblo people and modern Pueblo people are victims of genocide and all other sorts of elements associated with the settling of this country by non-indigenous people. And because of that, I never actually went out and dug any of this. I just looked at archives of what other people had done 100 years ago. And from that, I sort of derived this without ever having touched a bone or looked at anything other than a photograph or a note, sort of come up with this idea of maybe rewriting a little bit of history by looking at crania. And I'm not going to show you any crania or any of the photographs, but I would tell you, I'd love to tell you about the site that I worked at called Aztec Ruins. It's a misnomer. Basically, European farmers in the 19th century thought everything was so cool in northern New Mexico that no local people could have built these huge buildings that are just hundreds and hundreds of rooms and 4 and 5 stories tall. So they thought the Aztecs had come up from Mexico. The Aztecs were 300 years later. We won't get into that. The county is Montezuma County. We're just over 12 on sort of naming these sorts of things. But it's a huge site, and you can see that one part of it was excavated by a guy named Earl Morris in the 19-teens, and the other part of it is not excavated. That's where it looks right there. And this is all in the sort of the northwest corner of New Mexico. And if you've ever heard of Chaco Canyon, which is a World Heritage Site in northwest New Mexico, this site is related to it. It's its actual descendant sort of community. It's this thing that happened afterwards. And what I was looking at was I went through and I looked at burials, because nobody had ever sort of written a synthesizing chapter on burials. Morris sort of notated them in 1934, but he never synthesized it. And there was this one kiva, and a kiva is a semi-subterranean room in this pueblo. And I don't know why, but I think Morris had more money that summer. It was 1917, but sort of before the war started, and he took 3 photographs and made a map. So this is like 4,000% more information than I had on anything else, because he excavated 3/4 of this site, and he wrote on average, and I counted, again, the repeat of this evening will be, I have no life. He wrote 317 words on each of those rooms. Now, if anybody's ever been on an archaeological site or a paleontological site, you'll know that we sneeze and we write 317 words about the room. So this was just very sort of limited in its data, but this one we had some information on, and this kiva is a ritual structure, and there shouldn't be anybody in it. But what I found this map, and this is the only map of a kiva that Earl Morris ever wrote. I think he ran out of time. All the notes from the 1930s are his boss saying, "Write things down, stop digging," which kind of sounds right. So I found this map in the American Museum of Natural History from 1917, and it had all these numbers. And have you ever worked on a thing where you're like, I worked on this for a month and a half, and all I have to show for it is this? This is most of my life in 2016. So I went and I found what those numbers accounted for, and I found that in this kiva it had this central hearth, and it had this ventilation system, and all the sort of elements that are associated with a Chacoan kiva. This is from about AD 1100, early 1100, 1200. So this is like a Chacoan kiva where nobody should be buried in it, nobody. But there is evidence, that Morris wrote, there's an adult skeleton here, and then if you I know you can't see this, but it says child, 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 brain of child, upper jaw of child, lower jaw of child, and a plated mat. And this is really, like, weird. You know how, well, if anybody's been to graduate school, you know how you read everything until you just wish for death. I was reading everything, and I had never found anything sort of like this before, so I kind of came at it sort of sideways. And I wanted to think about this in context of Chaco Canyon, which is this incredibly important political center from about AD 900 to about AD 1100. And it was big and huge, and it radiated out. It had all these things called Chacoan outliers. An analog that's not a perfect analog is like the Vatican and Catholic churches. They sort of have political and religious and commercial order. That's my dissertation advisor, who's never complimented me in my life, except for I'm going to tell you about one thing in my next time. His name is Steve Lexon. And then that site was occupied for about 200 years, then people pieced out and they went to Aztec, and Aztec became the new capital of that central area that ruled basically from central New Mexico up into Colorado, over into Utah, into Arizona, this huge space. And they built these huge, extraordinary structures until they didn't. And they left, and they never came back, and that's a really unusual thing for Pueblo people to have done. So I went through, and I decided that I needed to do a more thorough analysis of all of these burials. And this is a very improper map that I did in graduate school. I didn't know any better. But unsexed meant that we were, and again, I never touched a bone. I just looked at photographs and notes. So people who were not determined to have a sex, then they're male and female, and then I basically put them into little stick figures, and this is the site that Morris excavated, and I put them into the areas where they were found, just to get a spatial orientation of where they are. And if you look at the round things, those are the kivas, and then the rectangular things are the rooms. And if you'll notice, there's almost nobody in a round thing, and there's lots of people in little rooms, with the exception of Kiva D, this one where there's 1 male adult and 4 unspecified children. And this one has a head that was thrown into it at a later date. Heads follow me. And so at the time of that I was in March of 2020, I don't know what you all were doing. I was teaching at CU Boulder, and I decided that I should back up. I went and found the remains of those kids. They're actually still at the American Museum of Natural History because they're not quite doing all the things that this museum has done as far as NAGPRA. And I just looked at them, and I was really curious because they were burned in a way that I have never seen before. And so in 2020, I decided I was going to do a brain vitrification project because I didn't understand why a brain was outside of a skull, and I didn't understand what process would have happened to have made that happen. Like if a regular fire would have caused that, if an accidental fire would have caused that, if a fire that was exacerbated by violence would have caused that. I didn't know. So I decided to get 12 sheep heads and burn them in different ways with children, with my students. Don't snort. I saw the snorting. It's humiliating. So I also did a survey, and I looked at all the kivas that have ever been excavated in the 500 years of Pueblo occupation in the U.S. Southwest, and I only found these cases where other humans had been buried. And one of them, we don't have data on whether or not they were on the ground or not. This could have been a post-occupational burial. One in Hamalavi, which is an individual who was clearly trying to climb out of the chimney. It was probably an accidental death. One at Point of Pines, which is really interesting because this brain too was also expelled from the crania, and one unknown at Awadavi. And this is a massacre that happened in AD 1700 of people of indigenous people, by indigenous people, for reasons that one group adopted Christianity, the other group took exception to that and went and rose up and basically killed everybody in that one village, and they killed them in the kivas. But otherwise, Aztec is an anomaly. So I decided I needed to test what had happened and why this had happened. So I got, don't look away, so I had 12 of these sheep's brains in the back of my car, and I had, I'm not even kidding, I went through all the bureaucracy. I had a kiln lined up, I had a blowtorch, I had so many firefighters volunteering to help me. We were going to blow up these sheep heads in a manner, and we had injected them with a genetic marker so that we could see if we could redo what the people at Aztec had suffered in this kiva. We couldn't, because we ended up sort of removing these like an Egyptian mummy, but it kind of worked out. And there were other analogs. It wasn't just in the Southwest where this was happening. So the same time that came out in 2016, that there was an individual from Herculaneum, when Vesuvius blew up, whose brain was vitrified. And then there was actually a group that said, no, it wasn't, which was, I love academic controversy. I think this is where academia is at its strongest. But basically, they found this individual on a bench in Herculaneum. He was a male. He was lying face down on the bench, and his brain had vitrified, or basically turned to volcanic glass. And this is what it looked like. And this was the best analog I had seen to what the individuals who had died in that kiva at Aztec looked like as well. And they turned to this sort of this glass-like structure. And like, I'm wondering what mechanism could possibly have happened to have done that to these children and this adult in this kiva. And how could heads possibly have exploded and expelled a brain? And I called around, and I had to find out at what temperature heads explode, because I know it sounds vile. I mean, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, and it does, because I can't tell you how many coroners hung up the phone on me, or fire investigators. But kivas, we know how kivas burn. We know how hot they burn, and if stuff is added to them, then that's purposeful. And whether that's purposeful for an internment, which is a considerate burial of someone, then that's one thing. But nobody's ever buried in a kiva. So the question is this evidence of warfare or forced political authority on individuals? And I think that this is a demonstration, if I can demonstrate the temperature at which this happened, sort of power warfare, sanctioned death in religious structures, and political messaging. And with that, you can sort of retell the story of the end of Aztec and Chaco Canyon, which has big implications for all of the history of the Southwest. Garth has now fled, so I think I should be done. Bye, Garth. I'm hurt. Yeah, thanks. So I think like in a site like this, where this might have come to a sudden and violent and sort of difficult end, that this has interest. And I really, really, really want to keep blowing up sheep heads at some time. So if I'm looking for help, anybody on board? Anybody. So then I just wanted to end with, like, for me, I took this quote. For me, and those buildings are called great houses. I don't know why they're called great houses. Just pretend a great house is a fortress, a palace, a home, and a symbol of power, majesty, and fear. For nearly 1,000 years, they have shaped famous landscapes. And these magnificent buildings have been home to some of the greatest heroes and villains of our national history. They burst with incredible stories of warfare, treachery, intrigue, and even murder. Okay, this is from a TV show that's on Great British Castles. But have you ever heard anybody talk about the history of ancient peoples in that way? I sometimes kind of think a little bit, and I don't want them to be sort of all violent stories, but stories that are re-given or collaboratively given back to ancestral Pueblo people and consequently modern people, that we sort of are, this is a form of social justice, that we have sort of frozen ancient people into a single sort of story. And I think by looking at the implications of the historical implications of a place like Aztec, that we can make it more interesting again. So I kind of think that yes, we have to work harder for the stories. There's this quote from Flinders Petrie that museums are ghastly charnel houses of murdered evidence. Baloney, Flinders Petrie, I call baloney on you. And I think that museums are kind of awesome, and they're the repositories of this information, and consequently, I think they rock. So thank you very much. I made it with 1 minute to spare. Do y'all have any questions? Hi, Paula. Questions? One question? 0 questions? This is also your time to flee, if you would so desire. And I'm totally listening. I'm just going to switch PowerPoints.
Did you ever figure out at what temperature do heads combust?
I think I have an idea, and I think it's about 800 degrees Celsius, but that was what the experimental project was going to be in March. I also still have a sheep head in my freezer ready to go if anybody wants to come over. This is why I have no friends. But I had to give up the other 11. Yeah. Okay, I don't know where my cursor is. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. Other questions? Should I get on with the next thing? I can't see you. Terrifying. No questions?
No?
My mom's a professor, and she said if nobody asked you a question, they were asleep, and you've done a crap job, so thank you all. I'm feeling good about myself. Thanks, Mom. All right, so really quickly, I got 15. Was that too fast? Did I talk too fast? No? Okay. I'm going to talk faster now because this is more fun for me. Heads are cool, but this is something that just happened very recently. Found a thing. So too long, didn't read. This is going to be a really traditional academic archaeological paper. I'm going to be really serious about it. And these are my points. Erin is the laziest scientist in this room. Aliens inspired this research, and artificial intelligence helped. Trust the crazy person. Mark Twain is ruining all of our lives, and museums are awesome. Kneel before us. Those are my points. I'm never going to get a job. Okay, so lazy, crazy, aliens, Mark Twain, AI, museums. That's the theme of the thing. And I want to say a really quick word about expectations, because I know a lot is going on in this museum right now. The timing of this talk was not all I had hoped it would be. Where are you, Tyler? Hi, Tyler. Just go to the back of the room. So I would like to say that I'm going to lower your expectations before I hopefully change them. So comparison is the death of joy. Screw you, Mark Twain. So I'm not going to compare to Tyler, and I'll come back as to the reason why. But let me just say that in the grand scheme of things, my research is sort of, we're the iceberg, and then the chrysalis and the butterfly, and who are we kidding? Tyler's awesome. He's in the middle of the geode. But I'm just saying that it's not that. It's just something different. I'm not going to compare it, but I'm excited to sort of, jump in after the really exciting week this museum has had. So the big reveal, are you ready? This is what it is. Stand back. Remember. Oh, good Lord. There it is. Yeah. Remember, we are here, okay? But let me elaborate just a little bit. So let me orient you. This is in Catron County, in New Mexico. Catron County is bigger than Connecticut and Rhode Island combined. If you lived there, you would be outnumbered by elk 4.5 to 1. Because only about 3,000 people live there, and I think all of them are armed. So this is in this area, right, sort of here in this Mueum region. If you laid over a population of where humans are, no one lives here, almost no one. And part of the reason is it's really, really robust country, and it's really high, and it snowed on us in May when we went down there, and it's all over the place. It's a hard place to grow corn, so if you were an Ancestral Pueblo person, it would be a kind of a marginal place to live. It's a beautiful place to go, though, so if you ever get a chance to come down, fall down. My editing skills are not all they could be, but this is basically where we're working, and we've been down there willingly, and we're kicking and screaming for a number of years with almost the whole Anthropology staff. And we've done a few things, like we dug this great kiva that was endangered, and we ended up reburying everything from it.
My name is I'm from Zuni, and I'm with the Zuni Cultural Resource Advisory Team.
And they helped us dig. The Zuni Cultural Advisory Resource Team helped us excavate the kiva. Then we did the analysis together. We did the interpretation. We've just turned in the book on it. And then we reburied everything.
I'm to be a part of this because that's what we were hoping for. We're always talking about they need to go back.
Yeah, so we sent everything back, which is kind of a really cool way of doing archaeology after analysis. But while we were doing archaeology, thank you, Rick, we found things that were cool. Like no one had ever documented these things, which are called thunderstorms. And that's Ronnie Kochny demonstrating. He's a rain priest, and he's summoning rain. And heck if it rained on us that night, which was it's kind of cool. But if you could imagine rolling that in a kiva, that was what comes from this collaboration. No archaeologist had ever sort of learned about that before. We also have taken on this other sort of pimple of a site called WS Ranch. It's on private property. It's really pronounced on the landscape. It's really green on this day. It sits right on the river, and this got actually excavated in the 1980s by a guy named Jim Neely, 1970s and 80s. He never wrote a word about it. And so it's a really important site. Lots of stuff came out of it. If you don't write it up, you're basically a pot hunter, so this is unfortunate. We're tracking down all of these things because they have been distributed to private communities all over the country. But the artifacts that ended up going to University of Texas are now been packed into 2 trailers and are downstairs and are being processed. So we've taken on this orphan collection, and along with collaborators, have reburied all the ancestors who were dug out of the ground without permission. So we've done the repatriation of it, and now we're going to be doing the write-up and things like that. And then here's all the guys who are doing the excavation at the Toriet Lakes Great Kiva. I would like to, again, the laziest archaeologist ever. I am sitting there listening to people, which is just embarrassing. And again, but this is this Mueum region, and I don't know if you saw me from the last talk, but if you didn't, I study this area. I do like architecture and big things and lowlanders and desert sort of peoples. This is the Mueum region. So when I came to work at DMNS, I had a little bit to go back to school, a lot to go back to school. So I didn't have a picture of me going back to school, so I had AI generate one. This is not what I look like, but I do like to study with skulls on my desk. But no, but I did have to go back and read everything, and I'd say I'm about a second-year level of graduate student now to learn all of this. But interesting things in the archives, because this is what I did my research on, was that sites that don't appear later in the literature that kind of fall off are interesting. That throwaway sentences are often where the magic is in sort of these old historic documents. If it's complex, it's often dismissed. And if it's known as a sucked orange, it's dismissed. And this is kind of this alien hypothesis that the anthropology of archaeologists and lots of academics is that you are a lone wolf. You are meant to be out and an individual, and you are meant to be discovering something. And if someone else has discovered it or written it up, no matter how well or how poorly, you move on because that's not what's going to get you a job. So there's this, and then there's this alien in the room. Like once the alien has been in the room for 80 years, you don't notice the alien anymore, right? So there's all these sites that are both discovered and forgotten, and then kind of familiar but not, that get left behind in the archives. And that's where lazy archaeologists come in and start reading about them. So I started reading, it was a cold night in Chicago, I started reading this sort of unpublished manuscript from the Field Museum that said this site is the largest site that had been examined. And Ronaldo and Martin are about the last people to really work in the Mueum region. There's been a little bit of here and there sort of stuff. An academic and 4 graduate students go down there and maybe dig part of something. But really significant stuff that hasn't happened since the 1940s. And this sounded big, and I had no idea where it was. So I asked my advisor, Steve, who doesn't like anyone, I think, and he's like, yeah, I tried to find it, I couldn't, and he knows everything. And then I found this map from 1947. This was at Harvard, and this is by a guy named Edward Danson, who happens to have a kid named Ted Danson, who was doing his dissertation at Harvard, and I've got little pictures of little baby Ted Danson running around all these sort of archaeological sites. But then it was called something else. It was called a different site. But I thought, I've never seen this in this region. Again, I'm in graduate school for the Mueum region. And then I found a picture from 1914 or 1907, I can't remember which. That's weird looking in this river valley that we drive through all the time. And then this guy named Walter Huff sort of wrote it up in 1907. This is what Ed Danson said. I don't know if you got to read it, but he said Huff was here in the aughts. And that was 40 years before Ned Danson got there. Then I went through the archives at the Smithsonian, and I found, he found this biggest copper bell, which comes directly from Mexico. People in the Southwest weren't smelting copper. It's the biggest one ever found. It's 5 inches. It's huge and extraordinary. And it was shown at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, which is very cool. And then there was this map, which is horrible because everything's on the wrong side of the river. and difficult. And there's this really informative sketch map. So I went and found, so there are these numbers. I went and sort of found what these numbers corresponded with. I redrafted it, and I found that he found all of this particular kind of pottery and these sorts of things in a burial, and this is a site. But again, it was like, I don't know if this is worth pursuing. This is kind of this, you roll the dice as a scientist to see whether something's interesting. And then there was this weird photo from 1895. So we've gone from 1947 back to 1907. Now we're moving back into 1895. I'm just building off what has come before. Because when Huff said in 1907, the site had been pretty dug up by the time he got to it. And there's this guy named Ulysses Francis Duff in 1895, and he published this in a local newspaper in Deming, and the site name was different and spelled differently. So if you did a Google search, you young people out there, it doesn't always work. And then he made a map, and he made a map of this lower ruin, which is huge. To give you an idea of how big it is, there's Ricketson. It's a big site, and it's a big site for something that's more than 1,000 years old. And then there was another site right next to it, 100 feet away, even bigger. And then there was this other site that was huge, and that corresponded really nicely with Danson's map from 1947. So then there's like, you're starting to get something, right? You're starting to layer things together that this maybe is significant. And then the reason that it never got published is because Ulysses Francis Duff got killed in a duel by his office mate. Things were rough in Deming, and so that was kind of unfortunate. And then I went back further in time to 1893, and this site called Delgar was on the cover of the New York Sun in 1893. And not only was it on the cover, it was thousands of words, of which I typed, and I now need new glasses, about this. I mean, it's really sort of unfortunate language now that we would never write like this, but it's really informative at the time, and there's pictures. And what he said is that Delgar is a consortium of 7 massive pueblos, that the Delgar family had lived on it for about 40 years and had dug every day on every Sunday afternoon for a picnic. And the walls were 25 feet high. They hadn't hit the bottom of it. They'd pulled 4,000 complete vessels out of it and 2,000 sets of human remains, along with jade, which comes from Mexico, along with turquoise, a shell that comes from California, things that are not local. And remember how I work up in Chaco? These are Chacoan. These aren't local. These are something else is happening on. This is what we call a site unit intrusive sort of thing. So I went back to the archives. This time I figured out how to do AI. I made her old. There you go. So that's better. So this is more what I did. And again, that map of Chaco that I did. But basically, I'll show it to you for those who just came in. But Chaco Canyon, again, is this area that's really significant in northern New Mexico that rose about AD 900, that had these massive great houses that were the size of Delgar and even bigger, and then which sort of were linked by roads and trade and other sorts of, we're having big debates about whether it's friendly or not, but these massive sites that I think are on par. That's bigger, that's Pueblo Bonito, that's kind of the Cadillac of them all. There's Lexan, bless his soul. And they're, just kidding, this is only online. Love you, Steve. And then they pieced out and they went to Aztec. And still, though, even though the capitals changed, the radiating sites that are currently called Chacoan outliers, but that's a phrase that's going out of fashion, were radiating outwards and taking over locational spaces elsewhere. This was a civilization. I mean, it was an empire for all intents and purposes. If you drop this into the center of Europe, it was an empire. And Delgar is probably a part of that. And it's one of these massive, huge sites. Again, this is the site that I did my dissertation on, that once white people got a hold of it and started digging it, things began to crumble. So this is where I was working in 2012, wearing green pants and unfortunate hats. This is what it looked like in the 1880s, the same exact corner of the same exact unit. And this is what happens after excavation. Things begin to fall apart, but they're still there. They're under the glacier. They're the chrysalis. They're still underneath the ground, and we can tell that from LiDAR. So this is this sort of remote laser range sort of way of looking at things, and it's kind of Rorschach-y, but you can kind of tell this is a national park. It's huge. That's a very clear LiDAR, but you can tell there's other sites elsewhere. There's sites up on the hill. There's kivas and things like that. So I had to go back, and now I'm pretty sure that there's, based on that description, that this is something related to Chaco. And then I had to go find it, and that went crazy. Whoa, all the things went nuts. Sorry, don't read anything. The animations. Sorry, you have to see this again. Sorry. Thank you. That's the pity-oo. I'll take it. So we had to go back and find it. And where is it? Right? I'd done the lazy girl, the reading with my skulls at home, but I had to rely on Google Earth maps. The fact that nobody who was senior to me in archaeology had any idea where this was, even though it's an incredibly significant site, and this, which is just wrong. I've stared at this for days. That just doesn't work, and it doesn't match up with anything that's on the ground now. So, by the way, Coronado camped there. I didn't know where to put this slide. Coronado camped at Delgar, and there's metal that's found there. So this site has kind of a little bit of everything. We went last month to go, and we used a drone, which I highly recommend in an area where people are heavily armed. We survived. The drone survived. Well, one of the propellers didn't, but the drone did survive. But the car didn't. We lost the bumper. Yeah, we hauled the bumper. What else? Oh, yes. We found a tombstone or cemetery where everyone died by gunshot. Everyone in that cemetery. And a man chased us off of a site we had permission to be on with a shotgun. Didn't get a photo of that. We were running. And then the neighbors set their house on fire because they were mad. She's right there. She's not wearing any pants. We fought that for a little while. And then I had the worst birthday, I think, ever. This is why I'm lazy and I stayed home. But basically, we found the site. And that's what it is. Yeah. So it's not sexy, though. It's not sexy, right? It's no Transformers, goddamn Rex. But it's pretty cool. Sorry, Tyler. It's pretty cool. And it's been, like, I think probably down there. The river's down here, and there's incredible rock art over here. This is all site. All of this is site. Every bit of it, and it's huge. And there's a cemetery on it, and trailers, and about 17 junk cars. And it's not extraordinary to look at, but I think it's really, really important and really, really worth our time to maybe look at it further. When we finally got permission to get out there, we had about 15 minutes. We took some photos. There's clearly double corn veneer walls that are very Chacoan. It's not a local architectural feature. These ants will kill you. And then sort of a number of things. I actually recorded people's reactions to it, but I realized this was going to go online, so I had to redact them all because they were R-rated, but they were all sort of expository in a manner. I usually don't use hyperbole about my own research, but this was so freaking cool. We all just had to go home and lie down. Because 3 archaeologists, 1 senior Zuni cultural advisory team, and the director of the Archaeological Conservancy kind of lost their minds about how extraordinary it was. And then what we did in our last week when we were down there, that's the site from above, is we did LiDAR. And LiDAR showed us what we couldn't see on the ground, and that is that this site is huge. It's more than 6 acres. It actually extends across the road and into another trailer park up there. And it's massive, and it hasn't been looked at. And it's something like that is buried under there. And it's still there. It's hurt. It's been really deeply hurt by other sort of pot hunting in the 19th and 20th centuries. But it's out there. And it's the southernmost Chaco outlier. There's Chaco Canyon. There's all this research that's been done up there. I've spent my whole professional life looking at this stuff. Nobody looks at the stuff down here because it's so remote. And this is probably the southernmost Chaco outlier in this time and in this place. So I did put in ChatGPT to sort of figure it out. What is the least well-known region in the Southwest? Mueum. Yep. What is the biggest feud in Southwest? They tried to be all politically correct. Mueum, confusing, something we don't know. And the Hopi want to work there. The Forest Service wants to help us. The landowner, we think, is on board, and the Archaeological Conservancy is making a cash offer this week for the property. So, yay. Oh, I finished on AI, just because I was embarrassed. Did I finish? No, I didn't finish on AI. It just shut down. Sons of all the monkeys. 1 second, sorry. Oh, it's totally, my computer just shut off. Excellent. Hold, please. Yeah, so I did use AI, throw the kitchen sink at it. This is what the team, like the Mueum archaeology, using archives, artifacts, archaeological sites. And I just want to end on the end bit. I'm sorry I went a couple minutes long. That I think the stories are going to be here. That watch out for the aliens, because we forget to look at what's really staring us in the face all the time. That laziness does pay off. I highly recommend archives and museums and things like that. AI is not so good yet. no longer under imagining. Think below the glacier, think below the geode, think into what could lie beneath, and think about not under imagining the complexities and glories of the past. And comparison and collaboration isn't the death of us all. I think it's pretty great that this museum allows researchers the time and the space and the thinking capacity to go out and find these things and contribute to our knowledge of our shared human existence. So thank you for that. And with that, I will shut up and answer questions. Thank you all.
Throw it. See ya. Oh my God. Okay, I won't throw it that far. You gonna catch it? Yeah.
I've always wanted to catch that. Thank you so much. Were the pots and the ancestors located, or have they been spread? Or, I mean, obviously, the pots and the ancestors from the site that you just identified.
So I found some letters. So there's a woman named Annie who dug the stuff from, are you talking about WS Ranch? Or are you talking about
The
Del
one
Bar?
that you just found.
The one we just found. Haven't delved into it, only found it last week. Haven't quite gotten there, but I will.
Wait, sorry. That was an unfair question, E.
No, apparently, so that one newspaper article from 1893 said every farmer in the county had a pot on their mantle and a skull on their bedside table, and that they thought the Delgards, everyone in the community thought the Delgards were nuts for spending their time doing that. But we don't know what happened to the collection. But if we get to work down there, man, that was the first priority to go find. And first priority would be to find human remains and get those back in the ground and get those back to the Hopi, the Zuni, or whichever tribe decides to sort of participate in a repatriation process and do that first order of business.
Hear, hear.
Thanks, Chelsea. Rickerson?
Thank you. That was great, Erin. Thank you. So assuming that the land is successfully acquired, do you have kind of a rough layout of what your next steps after that will be?
No.
Okay.
Long and the short of it. If I had my druthers, and again, this would be like thinking big, because my mom always said, if you don't think it, you can't do it. But if I was thinking big, I would love to get Hopi kids and teen science scholar kids and museum communities. And the Archaeological Conservancy is on board with excavation and research. The Conservancy is a nonprofit that buys up archaeological properties and then preserves them. But if some are in danger or some are already disturbed and we don't know enough about them, they encourage research. And it would take an institution like ours that was big and robust and had funding. If we could find private funding sources for that, it would be extraordinary. And it's a beautiful place to work, aside from the weaponry.
I remember you had a hypothesis about this when I first met you, and I am just so excited to see where you are now with it, which is awesome. Just question, how do you, where does your mind go when you're figuring out the resources and the research to identify all these different sources that you've identified to lead you to this place?
That's a really good question. I've never been that analytical about it. The way, and what I kind of am thinking about this because I'm doing this with teen science scholars now, which is we are going to do archaeology in City Park. And what it is undirected research. It's that thing that certain groups in our world rail against because you should have a reason and you should have a deadline and you should have a deliverable. And undirected research is, I'm going to go to the archives and I'm going to read till my face falls off. And then I'm going to synthesize that in my head by just staring at a wall, which is what I do most of the time in my office. And that ability to have that sort of time connects these sorts of things. And it connects like something that you read 6 months ago with something that you found out last week with a site you stumbled on when you were in New Mexico looking for something else. So that undirected research is a gift and a privilege in its own right. But reading everything is really the thing to do because almost all archaeologists, lots of archaeologists in academia are armchair archaeologists. We don't do that much field work anymore. But I grew up doing archaeology. I had a midlife crisis at 30 and went back to school. But I dug every day. That's why I can't use my knees up until then. And that was really important. Boots on the ground archaeology is important. But so, too, is the stuff that our people, older archaeologists have found and just have filed away, and which a tendency of younger people is to not go to those archives, not go to those resources. The publisher Paris world is to go and find something and discover it on your own, of your own volition, and publish it. And it's not to collaborate, it's not to get a whole group of people together to find things, it's certainly not to go read in the archives for 6 months. It's go, do, find. And this is why museums, I think, are so integral and important, both for the salvation and saving of the materials, because everything I found was in a museum. But also to allow maybe the resources to go and do LIDAR and to meet with the Hopi and the Zuni folks and to go down and live in that single wide and not catch on fire. I mean, it's just, it's all lovely, but it's kismet, and I just feel actually so privileged to be able to get to do it. Did that answer your question, sort of? Yes. Okay. I lost the thread. Over here.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm very interested in LIDAR, and I don't really know a lot about it.
No.
How easy? Well, how easy is it to access it? As a researcher, like, do you need permits for it?
No, there's actually really good online free sources now. It comes out of NASA and it comes out of all sorts of things, but it's basically please keep in mind I'm a liberal arts major, but it's basically this ranged light system that you can, it's aerial, and then you would fly above, and then you would shoot light down, and that light would actually penetrate lots of different things. It would penetrate chairs, and it would penetrate if there was grass. And then what you can do afterwards in this post-process is you can remove the trees, or you can remove the chairs, and you can see what's underneath it. So that's why they find all these, these new sites in the Petén and the Maya region and things, because they can just lift the trees right off and see things. For this, I hired a brilliant young scholar from Wyoming who came down. He brought his own beer, which is always a good sign, and he has a drone that does it. And his drone is so much fancier than the free stuff that's available publicly that he could fly into the air, and he could actually identify sherds on the ground, little pieces of pottery, and date the site without ever having to walk on it. Because the first time I was down there last summer, we were right up against the fence line, flying the drone and trying to peer because we didn't have permission. And that was where we got the idea that LIDAR would be our salvation to actually really identify where this site was.
Is this fairly new technology?
It's new to the public sphere. It's not as new to archaeology. It's definitely not new to sort of the science tech industry, and definitely not new to, the war machines.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice. Monica Sellis there. That was good.
Anybody?
Done?
Done?
Thank you all very, very much for coming. Appreciate it. Woo!